Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm sure we'll still have a few more people joining us, but for now, we'll go ahead and get started. And first, I just want to thank you and welcome you all to Idaho Rivers River Advocacy Training, or River RAT, on Mike Simpson's latest proposal, the Northwestern Transition and Columbia Basin Fund. First, Idaho Rivers United has worked towards salmon and steelhead recovery longer than any other organization in Idaho and perhaps the entire region. For over 30 years, this has been our top priority. And while we've had incremental successes in protections for our declining fish populations, the last 2 years have seen the largest groundswell for advancement toward recovery. This culminated with the proposal posited by Congressman Simpson in the Northwestern Transition and Columbia Basin Fund, which you'll learn about tonight. So I encourage you all to participate and please ask as many questions as you can, as this is a broad, comprehensive package with many nuances, some still being worked out. Thank you all again for joining us tonight. First, I'll give a little background. There's several key issues with the current system. First and foremost, science has empirically demonstrated over the last 30 years that the lower Snake River dams are the single greatest contributor of the decline of Idaho's salmon. Too many of Idaho's salmon are dying. Idaho's fish have to navigate 4 dams too many. This results in salmon-based communities, our river communities, our Idaho outfitters and guides are all suffering. BPA is in a financial crisis. BPA is the Bonneville Power Administration. And I will say that we'll use a lot of acronyms tonight. So if anybody has a question on what an acronym that we use means, please put it in the chat or ask the question and we'll define it. Next, the use of the dams is in decline. Shipping via barges on the lower Snake has declined by as much as 80%. The dams themselves are getting extremely expensive. Peak energy production times for the dams do not correspond to peak energy demand, and very little of the energy produced by the dams is being used in the Pacific Northwest. So the proposal, the Northwestern Transition and Columbia Basin Fund, includes comprehensive investments in clean and affordable energy, efficient transportation, water quality, technology development, agriculture, and local economic generation for river communities. This really does take care of every stakeholder along the entire river system and benefits all of the state of Idaho greatly. If enacted, Representative Simpson's Columbia Basin Fund would be the largest river restoration campaign in history. And I'm glad you're all here as you play the most critical role in the success of this recovery effort. Again, thank you all for joining us, and please participate and ask us as many questions as possible. Stephen?
All righty, well, thank you, Nick. My name's Stephen Pfeiffer. I'm the Conservation Associate here at Idaho Rivers United. Good to see some familiar names in the chat there, and welcome if you're new as well. Tonight we're gonna just be going over the ins and the outs of the recently released plan by Representative Simpson. Let me see if I can share my presentation here. Okay. Can folks see that first slide there? Great, okay. So we'll roll through here. So what we're referring to his proposal as is a Northwest in transition. A few moving parts here to be sure. There we go. So in essence, the plan is a framework that allocates $33.5 billion of federal funding in order to restore the lower Snake and our wild, abundant salmon returns, strengthen our agricultural and fishing communities, and modernize our regional energy grid. On the bottom of that slide, you can see a graphic that is actually from Simpson's website. And so his folks kind of place the different stakeholders' issues around the region in different bins. And so the idea is that with this significant investment, we'll take care of all of these folks that rely on the river, rely on the fish. Okay, so why is the Northwest in Transition Plan necessary? And I know Nick touched on this a bit, but in short, the current system's broken. Our wild salmon steelhead have been on the verge of extinction for decades now, in no small part due to the aging, costly hydro system. That's the 8 dams on the Columbia Snake Rivers, which really hamper their migration and the survival through that migration corridor. River towns and tribal people who rely on those sustained salmon runs have been marginalized. Local communities are not fully realizing their potential and are under perpetual uncertainty. And for decades now, it's been a cycle of failed federal recovery plans, and that has cost regional taxpayers $17 billion. And none of our fish are off that Endangered Species Act list. So where the opportunity really lies is with an act of Congress, and Representative Simpson recognizes that. His plan outlines a path forward for the Northwest. It includes abundant salmon runs alongside those traditional strong agricultural communities and a reliable energy grid. And it's important to note that the opportunity is much bigger than just dam removal and salmon recovery. There's a lot of parts, a lot of investment that'll go into modernizing the grid, setting up local communities for success for decades to come, with more certainty, more reliability in the way that we transport our goods and our infrastructure as a whole is built. And also, it places the right folks in charge of fish recovery, so we can prioritize not just salmon steelhead, but also important species like lamprey, like sturgeon, and different habitat work that's been going on throughout the basin. So at a glance, what does the plan do? Well, first and foremost, especially to a lot of you folks on the call tonight, it proposes breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams and increasing the spill over the 8 current dams in the interim. This has been scientifically shown to be the only effective recovery method for Idaho salmon and steelhead. It also places our states and the basin tribes as co-equal fishery managers under a new management entity. So it takes away the responsibility of fish management from Bonneville Power, which was a bit contradictory to start with, and puts it in the hands of folks that really want to do some good work there. It reconfigures the Lower Snake River Grain Transportation Network, which we'll touch on in a little bit more detail coming up. And it also invests in our local communities like Lewiston, like the Tri-Cities along the Lower Snake River, not only for economic development, but also for tourism opportunities and revitalizing the connection those folks have to their river. It sets up watershed partnerships, which we'll touch on as well, which are a really, cool setup between agricultural interests as well as the tribes and conservationists. And it also incentivizes utilizing that animal waste from feedlots operations, along the Snake, for example, and containing that better, which has been, a major source of pollution over the years. So to highlight a few aspects of the plan, touching on the salmon first and foremost, as I said earlier, breaching the dams and increasing the spill over the remaining lower Columbia dams has for decades now been shown to be the only effective recovery option we have. And this plan by Representative Simpson gets that job done. And so based off of that, populations in the wake of breaching are modeled to increase 2 to 3 times in abundance as a result. Not to get too into the weeds and the science here, but an important metric, the small to adult ratio, basically how many adults are coming back upriver for juveniles migrating out to the ocean. With dam breaching, we have the ability to meet those crucial goals, 2 to 6% with a 4% average, which will build our salmon populations, steelhead populations from the brink of extinction to, abundant, healthy, and harvestable numbers that can support folks and the many plants and animals that rely on them, such as the southern resident orcas, which I know are near and dear to many folks' hearts. The Chinook salmon coming from Idaho are actually one of their primary food sources. And so, it has a ripple effect, not only for just salmon steelhead, but for also the many species that rely on them. Another piece that you may have read about in the news is a moratorium on litigation surrounding the dams as related to anadromous fish. And so Simpson is proposing a 35-year hold on any legal action relating to, the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, some of these landmark environmental laws as it relates to dams. That being said, he also provides $500 million of funding for the voluntary removal of, these aging dams and assets, if folks choose to do that. And so, this may be a bit contentious for some, but our take on it is that, hey, he's supporting breaching the Lower Snake River dams, which represents the largest river restoration project in history, and is the, scientifically proven the only way to get our wild fish back to recovery. And while the litigation has been vital in keeping our fish alive, it was the end product of decades of divisive and failed recovery strategy. So, feel free to drop some questions in the chat box, if you'd like a little bit more clarification on that. But yeah, we see, Nick, did you want to jump in at all?
Yeah, I'm going to add just something before we move
Sure.
on beyond this. So one thing to note with the 35-year moratorium on litigation related to anadromous fish is that it's litigation that is only directed at anadromous fish as the sole source for the litigation. So if you're wanting to litigate, or if you need to do some drastic measures around pollutants, methyl mercury, temperature, stuff like that, that still is available to us. So it doesn't prohibit us from litigating or challenging some of the effects that'll have detrimental causes to salmon populations. It's only if we're litigating directly about salmon and steelhead numbers. But feel free, again, if you have questions or want any clarification on that, please put it in the chat box.
Yeah, that's a good point to flag, Nick. And also another thing to keep aware of is that, in this plan, in this wide sweeping plan, there's a lot of funding for, fish recovery, river restoration, species that are impacted by dam passage, like sturgeon, like lamprey. So don't think that, Representative Simpson is turning his back on river species that are still impacted by things like this. And so to touch on the agriculture irrigation piece just briefly, the plan will secure a grain transportation network in the absence of the dams. And so there's ample funding for the grain farmers to themselves, decide how do they want to reconfigure their transportation network, their handling networks in anticipation of dam removal. And there's also ample funding for the modification of those ports along Lower Snake River so they can handle, short line rail in the absence of barging. Another agricultural piece is those watershed partnerships that I was talking about, which will link folks from the agriculture community, tribes, conservationists to work together on water quality projects, salmon habitat projects in watersheds across the Columbia. Another piece is the irrigation, which is mainly focused along Ice Harbor Dam. And there's funding in Simpson's plan, Simpson's proposal to give those folks, the infrastructure needs that they need to adapt to the lower water levels that a free-flowing Lower Snake River will have. And finally, the waste management piece is very interesting. There's funding for universities to do research into, how can we harness all of this waste that's being produced by feedlot operations into biofuel, and also incentivizes these feedlots to better contain the discharge, because that is a big source of pollution, especially along Snake River, as many of you know. So I think that's a really exciting piece. Yeah, Nick.
I'm gonna interrupt you for a minute. We got a couple questions in the chat box.
Okay, yeah, I can't really see the chat, so.
Oh no, you're fine. Brian O'Connell asked if it was possible for the 35-year moratorium to pass and the Lower Snake River dams to fail when this goes to a vote, or will they be tied together? It is, those are definitely tied together. One can't happen without the other. Stephen, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Good point. Keep rolling through. If we can, stuck on the slide here. Let's see. There we go. Okay, and then the last one of the last points I wanted to touch on was the energy grid, and that's where the bulk of this $33.5 billion is going to. The goal of ensuring the stability, the reliability of that grid in the face of a changing energy and climate landscape. And so what that looks like is, I believe, about $10 billion of investment going towards non-carbon replacement energy for the lower Snake River dams. And an important point is that that would be at nameplate capacity, which, as I'm sure many of you know, those lower Snake River dams don't produce. They are run-of-river dams, so oftentimes they're producing much less than what their full potential capacity is. So, if we're investing in enough replacement energy to meet that, nameplate capacity, what that really means is we're increasing our the energy on our grid, the reliability of our grid. And then also there's a few $1 billion that'll go towards replacing energy lost from the increased spill at the remaining dams, because the maximum recovery is going to occur not only from lower Snake River Dam removal, but also from that increased spill, which is a crucial part at the lower Columbia dams. On the energy side of things, also a very exciting development in Simpson's plan is the Snake River Center for Advanced Energy Storage, which would be a Department of Energy program headquartered in both Lewiston-Clarkston area and the Tri-Cities. And its mission would be to develop advanced energy storage methods, basically to capture all of the abundant renewables that we have in the Northwest, the wind, the solar, on a system-wide scale. So really ramping up how we incorporate renewables into our grid. And it would also incorporate a consortium of higher education universities from Montana, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, to be involved in research and development on the renewable energy front. I think, with the idea of having that area really become a tech hub and a leader in renewables, not just on a regional scale, but also a national one. The last piece is local community investment. As I mentioned, the Lewiston, Clarkston Valley, and the Tri-Cities would have a great opportunity for economic development through this tech and research hub, and also, get a lot of university presence in there. Beyond that, like I said, there's going to be a good amount of funding for restructuring the ports along the lower Snake River, and also expanding that port at Tri-Cities, where the rail line will end and barging will continue down to lower Columbia. Also, there's going to be heavy investments in the tourism and the local economy sectors. Examples would be the creation of a national recreation area along the now free-flowing river if the dams were breached, and taking advantage of all the tourism that would result from that. And then also revitalizing that Lewiston-Clarkston waterfront, which right now is a big berm, more or less. And, the downtowns of those two cities aren't really connected to the river like they once were before the dams. So taking an opportunity to restore that connection that the community used to have with the river. So lastly, what does this mean for Idaho? Well, pretty simply, Idaho comes out as a winner through this proposal. We get the best shot that we get, once in a lifetime opportunity to effectively recover our wild salmon steelhead to abundant levels that can support, folks that rely on them. We can also have long-term security and reliability in our grain transportation. We can maintain that. Endangered Species Act restrictions and uncertainty can be removed from landowners across Idaho if these fish are recovered. A revived river and revived tribal communities and sport fishing industry would result from recovered salmon steelhead. Heavy investment in rural communities and infrastructure, like I was mentioning in the Lewiston-Clarkston region, which is an area that has been left behind in many ways and could really use a heavy investment and the opportunity to be at the forefront of some exciting energy development as far as renewables go. And then, of course, continuing the strong Northwestern tradition that we have of agricultural communities and a reliable grid, while placing salmon and steelhead in their rightful place alongside those traditional economies. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But yeah, with that, just a few key takeaways. I think the time is really now for us as Northwesterners to reach out to our electeds and let them know that this is a solution that allows the region to determine its own fate and not have it dictated to it. Because the Northwest is in transition, and these changes are going to come whether we're ready for them or not. So I think becoming pragmatic and taking, grasping this opportunity fully will allow us to, recover our wild salmon steelhead while also fixing, aging systems that could really use that investment. So before we get to, question and answer and all of that, I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin, and she's going to talk about how you guys can get a little bit more involved and where you can find more information on this issue.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. This is clearly a comprehensive plan, and I know we want to leave lots of time for questions, but I'm going to share a few resources we have for you to take action and to learn more. In the meantime, feel free to write your questions in the chat, and if you want to ask them privately, you can send them directly to me, and I will pose them to Nick and Stephen. But let me share with you a couple of resources that we have on our website. So we have this page. I'll post the link in the chat, but this is our Northwest in Transition plan overview, basically. And so we have gathered some questions that we've heard and some of the resources on Congressman Simpson's website for you. So if you have questions about anything, you can go to this page and click on these drop downs and learn more. And like I said, there's a lot of information, so take some time to look at that. Another way you can get involved is, going through my tabs. Another way you can get involved is we have this handy form on our website where you can directly write to your elected officials. So I'll put the link to this again in the chat, but this, you'll fill it out, click take action, and you can write a letter that we have pre-designed for you, or you can alter it and write whatever you want, and it'll go directly to your elected officials. So whether you're in Idaho or elsewhere, it's set up to go to your representatives and senators, and then there's a separate letter that'll go directly to Mike Simpson, so you can give him your thanks or tell him your concerns or questions about the plan, and that'll go directly to those guys. So that's another way. Two more things. We are piloting a program this summer with the Sawtooth National Recreation Area to give folks an opportunity to volunteer on the Salmon River directly with salmon and steelhead, and education about these important fish. So this program, we will host volunteers in the Sawtooths on the weekends during salmon spawning season, and folks will help educate the public about reds and being careful around the reds and all of that. So we're going to do a Zoom on March 30th with a little bit more info with the Forest Service about this program and how to get involved. So again, if you want to speak up for salmon and steelhead, we'd love to have you get involved with the Sawtooth River Stewards program. And one last thing, if you're not a member of Idaho Rivers United, we would love your support. We're doing a membership drive now through March 19th. And if you become a brand new member, you'll receive a really cool pair of IRU chums to keep your sunglasses on your head. And if you're already a member, if you refer a new member, you'll also get a pair of chums. So membership helps us do this work, and a lot of the work that we're doing behind the scenes, meeting with elected officials and working on this proposal that, like Nick said, we've been working on salmon recovery for 30 years. And this feels like an exciting time, but we could still use your support as there's still more work to be done. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll post all those links in the chat. We'll also send a follow-up email tomorrow with links to everything I just talked about. But for now, it looks like we're getting some questions rolling in. So Stephen and Nick, if you want to answer them.
I'll answer Kaz's question first. Kaz asks, this amazing plan won't happen without elected officials throughout Idaho and Eastern Washington on board with this. Many already speaking out opposed. Is there a plan to get elected officials on board? And Kaz, that's a great point. I will say that while some of the elected officials in Eastern Washington and Idaho have spoken out against this, behind the scenes, they're actually being receptive to a lot of the pieces in this. I think that, they realize that this is probably the only opportunity that we'll have for the Pacific Northwest to be able to dictate our own future. Right now, throughout Oregon, Idaho, and Washington, we have a very senior delegation, and we have the ability right now to affect that change. And I think even the people who have made public statements really to appease a lot of the donor base that they have in opposition to breach, they're a lot more open to it in private conversations. And I think the more that we get some of the key traditional opponents to come on board, which a lot of them really have been quite receptive to, it'll provide more political space for those people to be able to come out in support of this plan. Right now, I know that we've had very substantive conversations with a number of members of Congress, both from Washington and from Oregon, in addition to all of the Idaho delegation. We've met with each of them. I take that back. We're meeting with Crapo's office tomorrow. So, but the discussions that we've had with all of them have been, this would be the first time I've ever come out of some of those meetings thinking that was productive and there's actually a glimmer of hope with this person. So I think once more people are given the political space to do this, that's when you'll see people being able to change their tone and say that I'm on board with this, or I can support Mike Simpson, or this really will benefit my district, whether you represent Lewiston or the entire state of Idaho. Once this really gets a little bit more steam, you'll see a lot of people either coming out in support that have remained silent, or people changing their tune about this proposal.
All right,
Yeah,
Nick,
and
go ahead.
Just to quickly, jump on that, I think, what's really important to consider is that Simpson coming out and saying that, hey, we can invest in the Northwest and also remove the Lower Snake River dams is really shifting the conversation that we've been having for decades on sand recovery. And so, now it's our job as citizens of the Northwest to build on that momentum. But we have this great template, this really bold step forward that he took. And so now it's our job to run with it.
Yeah,
what's the next question?
Looks like the next question is, what about Bonneville Power? Where does BPA stand on this plan?
Well, ironically, the new administrator, his name's escaping me at the moment, Hairston, came out and said that there are some very intriguing elements of this plan, and they want to vet it much more thoroughly, which is a huge shift from what Bonneville Power has said in the past, from any proposal, which has always been categorically, these dams are completely important, not only to the Northwest, but to our portfolio. So I think BPA understands that they gain a lot from this, this proposal. Not only, would the power generation be replaced, this proposal doesn't posit that it wouldn't necessarily be under BPA's purview. It may or may not. But very importantly for BPA, this would also double the borrowing authority that they have from the federal government, which, given the current financial state of BPA, is a huge win for them.
Awesome. Thanks. We're getting lots of questions rolling in, so I'm just going to keep going. Someone asked about the dams on the Columbia River and if they are addressed in this plan.
Can you repeat that, Caitlin? I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the dams on the Columbia River. They're not considered in this plan. Or
So they
not
would actually
considered
be,
for
they
river.
would fall under the 35-year moratorium. They would actually get a license extension under this plan. So they wouldn't be under consideration. In fact, part of the plan for this was to give certainty to the other dams on the Columbia, main stem Columbia. So.
Someone asked about the timeline. When would these be breached?
Yeah, so as of right now, in this framework that Simpson released, the dams would be breached starting in 2030. And so, I think primarily that is meant to give us enough time to put in place all of these investments and get, all of our communities, shifted into these new transportation networks, rail, all that stuff. Give them plenty of time to adapt to a future without those lower 4 dams.
And I did notice that it said the 117th Congress, so it's just that this legislation is supposed to be drafted and voted on in the 117th Congress.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Sammy's questioning the cost. So, Stephen, did you say 10 billion in energy infrastructure projects?
Yeah, that is a billion with a B. Yeah.
Maybe can you relate that to what we've spent thus far?
Yeah. So, over the last 30 or so years, we've spent, public taxpayer money to the tune of $17 billion. And so you can kind of compare it to a vicious cycle where our future only holds more and more money sunk into failed recovery, because if you follow the science, the only effective method is to breach those dams. So that's why it's imperative to take this opportunity as soon as we can.
So with following up on that, to drill down a little bit more, 6 billion of that is really allocated and appropriated for project development that will replace the power from the lower Snake River dams. 4 billion is actually allocated for the increased spill and the lost power generation from the increased spill during the interim period when the dams are breached.
Thanks, guys. Jan asked about Lewiston and where do they stand on this? She said they made a big deal about becoming a seaport.
It depends on which person you ask in Lewiston. It really is a divided community on this, although it has become much more receptive to this in that they see a new vision for Lewiston in this. And actually, we'll have a link to a Lewiston vision study that was done, kind of a revitalization, and it will take you what a new Lewiston will look like once these dams are breached. And it's a really incredible and powerful presentation on that. But the city of Lewiston, they did make a very pointed effort to become a seaport with promises of economic generation and prosperity. And it really hasn't come to fruition. In fact, the economic expansion of the Lewiston region is the lowest of anywhere in the state. And so the promise that these dams were supposed to fulfill has never come to fruition. And people are really looking to something else up there to provide that engine for economic growth.
Thanks, Nick. Thad asked about irrigation in the Columbia Snake River irrigation Association, I think. And he said, looks like they're going to be one of the loudest voices in opposition. So Stephen or Nick, if you want to speak to the irrigation part of this.
The Columbia Snake River Irrigators Association was actually the first traditional opponent to come out and say, I embrace this proposal. Yeah, so they've been talking around fixes for the system for quite a while now, for probably the past year, but they stand to really gain a lot more certainty for their way of life and whatnot. The mitigation efforts and appropriations that were put in place for this were through direct consultation with the CSRIA and their board of directors, and really they got exactly what they wanted, what they said they would need to remain whole. So they've as an organization have come out in support of it. Now, if you talk to an individual irrigator, that might be different, but yeah, the CSRIA was one of the first to really embrace this as a new path forward.
Awesome, thanks, Nick. I'm not seeing any other questions unless I missed one, but I might pass the mic to Tom Stewart, if that's okay. I think he had something to add. And Tom, I forgot to mention the Twitter campaign. So if you want to mention that, you can.
I'll start with a couple of additions to Kaz Dia's question. Kaz, your question was how we engage the politicians in Northern Idaho and Eastern Washington to support or go along with this proposal. A couple of pieces to that. That isn't entirely our job. Our job is obviously moving our Idaho politicians as firmly and as strongly as we can. You know, that involves openly supporting Congressman Simpson. It involves urging Senator Risch, Senator Crapo, and Governor Little to work with Congressman Simpson to develop and advance and support this program. I know Simpson and the other Idaho politicians are working actively now with some of those folks in Oregon and Washington to bring them on board. So that is happening every day. I know Congressman Simpson's office has met with all of those people. You know, he's met with opposition with some of them, and open-mindedness with some of them, and support from others. So that is partly his job as well. That's what we know. That's what good politicians do. We're also engaged very closely with the regional coalition that has lots and lots of allies in Washington and Oregon that are working on those people on behalf of Idaho salmon and on behalf of Congressman Simpson's proposal. So I think what's important to know is that this work is happening. It's a work in progress. There's a lot going on. It's not entirely our job, but we have a role to play. And it's a matter of encouraging our politicians to engage and help Mike Simpson and help him work with the other delegation members in Oregon and Washington to make this happen. On the Twitter campaign, I think Dave Canamella is on the line. I think he is a better expert to talk about that than I am.
Thanks, Tom. Dave, if you would like to mention the Twitter campaign, I'm trying to find you so I can unmute you.
By way of introduction, Dave Canamella is not only a salmon scholar, but he was also IRU Salmon Advocate of the Year last year. So thanks for joining us, Dave.
Hey, thanks. And thanks for the honor. And all we got to do now is save the fish and we'll be there. So relative to the Twitter campaign, and there are a lot of parallel tracks going on here. So it's great, ICL, IRU, Sierra Club. But the Twitter campaign is basically an ask for people to create with their iPhones or whatever other method they can use a video of up to a minute, 30 seconds is better, basically asking our delegation to get behind Simpson's plan. And so there are a lot of creative people out there that have done a few, and they're really pretty slick. But the idea is to generate as many of these things as possible And you can go to, I guess the Sierra Club has them posted. And I don't know, Tom, if other people have them posted, but they're out there so you can kind of get an idea what some folks have done. And I did one and it's not great, but it's okay. But it was really easy. And so I would encourage people to, like mine took me about 40 takes. It won't take you that many, but I would encourage people to find a good background, the Boise River or some other good background, and have your 2 cents and tell Fulcher and Crapo and Risch and Brad a little to get behind the plan. Because as Nick and Stephen have said, it's up to us now. We are not quite on the road to recovery, but at least now we have a road. That's how I'm looking at it. So we've got to do our part. And as long as I have the mic, and I'll quit in a minute. Sierra Club has a Zoom at 7 o'clock, and I'm doing a presentation, and Lisa's doing a presentation, and some of it will be overlapping, and some won't. But for people that are on this Zoom and want to jump onto that one next, you're welcome to do so. And so, as I mentioned, there is a lot of momentum being generated by individuals and organizations. And I think both Stephen and Nick mentioned this is our opportunity, and it's a really good one, and we need to seize on it. What did I miss?
That was perfect, Dave. Thank you. It looks like we're getting a few more questions, Nick and Stephen. So I'll answer this one. Bryn asked about writing letters to her representatives in Colorado. And yes, that is helpful. This will take an act of Congress, so we're going to need buy-in from all of the states. I'm sorry that the form wasn't working for you. I'll double check on that and we'll see what we can do. But yes, out-of-state letters help, and letters to your state's elected officials help. Jan asked, how will the silt behind the dams affect the river when they are breached? So Stephen or Nick, if you want to take that.
Yeah, I can touch on that briefly. So yeah, in the plan, there's funding to dredge a lot of that silt before the dams are breached. There's also funding to ensure that when the dams are breached, all the sediment on the side, the river banks is stabilized to make sure there's no erosion over normal levels occurring. And yeah, obviously there is going to be a significant amount of silt traveling downriver. But it seems like they're going to put a lot of funding and attention into, studying the effects of that and making sure it doesn't, hamper with any sort of, wildlife survival or industry going on the river.
And to that effect, there is actually in the plan, there's a $400 million sediment mitigation fund for that purpose that'll be administered by the Army Corps of Engineers. Additionally, there's $75 million for Lower Snake River corridor restoration. So beyond the two of those, yeah, they've got $475 million appropriated for that.
Thanks, guys. I'm not seeing any more questions. We are getting kind of close to time. We said we'd call it at 7. So if you have another question, we still have some time. If not, please take action on this. So post on Twitter, #SaveIdahoSalmon, fill out our take action form and write to your elected officials. Ask questions throughout. So if you think of questions after this, feel free to email us and we are happy to answer them or help you look into them. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Caitlin, I'll add too, part of Congressman Simpson's pitch was that he doesn't know for sure that this will recover salmon and steelhead, but he knows without doing this that we do dam them to extinction. I will say that there's never been a dam removal project where fish didn't recover in much greater numbers. In fact, we can use studies of just the Elwha River. over in Washington. The projections for salmon coming back to the through that river and repopulating it have been blown out of the water by the numbers that have come back in. Similarly, the Kennebec over in Maine had an anadromous run of alewives, which aren't exactly salmon, but very congruent as they go out to sea and then come back to the river. And the population was at 0 when that dam was breached. And that population is now over 1 million fish. So it shows that these fish are really resilient. And if given the opportunity, once these dams are out, they will come back.
Yeah, I think Representative Simpson said it best when a few months ago he said, the fish need one thing, they need a river. They're pretty darn resilient, and yeah, they're fighters.
All right, everyone. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions pop on. If you want to continue learning about this, I was asked to tell you that the Sierra Club is hosting another Zoom at 7 o'clock, also about the Northwest and Transition Plan. So if you want to keep learning, go check out the Sierra Club's website and you can learn some more. But yeah, feel free to check out the links that were in the chat. We'll send an email tomorrow with links to everything we talked about. And if you have additional questions, you can reply to any of those emails and we will get back to you. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming and for engaging on this important issue. We feel hopeful and excited about what's to come. All right, have a great night.
Thank you all.